Hi, and welcome to InFocus. This is Jabbar Al-Obaidi. In this episode, we'll talk about something is going on in the country that's related to racism, all kinds of racism, and also about the relation between, unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic and community of colors. And with me in this discussion, my friend, I'm proud to call him my friend, Dr. Kevin McGowan, and he's assistant professor at Department of Elementary and Childhood, also early education and care program. And in addition to that, he's a faculty associate with Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice. Thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time to talk to our audience on InFocus. And I just would like to start first with this question. How are you doing and your family are doing in terms of the COVID-19 and all what's going on in the country?
Thank you for that question relative to my family. So everyone in my immediate and extended family are doing well, including my 92-year-old father and 88-year-old mother. So they're in good health and good spirit relative to what's going on with COVID. But of course, have concerns about the disparities in terms of how it has negatively impacted communities of color, especially Black and Brown folks. But thanks for the question, because they're doing fine physically and mentally strong also.
I'm glad to hear that, and I wish them well, and also I wish you well. Kevin, as you know, it's a lot going on in the country, and now people came, to a fact that in the United States, and I would dare to say through the globe, that we need to talk about racial issues. We must talk about racism. Why is that happening in the United States and around the world, Kevin?
I think that we've just come to a point in time where we need to take our discussion and take our issues around structural racism to the next level. Each preceding generation has moved the ball forward, and now this is our calling from this point in history to move the ball even further and start to actively disrupting structural racism. Because structural racism exists in all of our public and private institutions, including higher education. So now is the time to look at how we have this multicultural, diverse coalition of people around the country and around the world who are now galvanized to look at and tackle and disrupt structural racism.
Kevin, what do you, how you define so people understand, if they don't understand the very term racism? What's racism? If you can put it in historical perspective and cultural perspective, so people will relate to that and understand to that and start to address it in various ways.
Well, kind of looking at it from a historical perspective, even if we look at the construct of race, it's a socially constructed phenomenon created to put white at the top and, quite frankly, black at the bottom, sort of a justification for the horrors of slavery. So if you put white at the top and black at the bottom, black is less human. So, of course, early in our nation's history, Black men were three-fifths of a person, and only considered three-fifths of a person so that the South could have extra leverage in terms of congressional allocations. So a social construct built on the premise of putting white at the top, and it's been quite effective because when you put white at the top, then white people from lower socioeconomic classes, they identify with their whiteness before they identify with their lower socioeconomic status. And in many cases, they're in the same boat with Black and brown people, but because they have white skin, they think that they are a level above, and they are in terms of structural racism. So you can drive while white from any socioeconomic group and not necessarily be pulled over because of the color of your skin. But you could be a Harvard-educated professional and you happen to be Black or brown, and you are going to be pulled over because of the color of your skin. So it's lots of multifaceted, complex issues that play into this current situation that we have happening here. And I think what we saw with George Floyd was kind of the needle that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So people had already been concerned about the racial disparities related to COVID. And then on May 25th, we all get a chance to see in vivid detail what happened to George Floyd. And I think folks, Black, white, brown, from across racial, political, and socioeconomic groups said enough is enough.
Now, with that come, which is, you know, you are well really put it in not just social perspective, but also in very humanistic perspective. So people, they start to they should rethink their thinking and also look into themselves and see what they can do about that, because that's a call should be honored by every individual, every American citizen, everybody around the world. Constitutionally speaking, is this, you know, the issue of racism has been addressed, or is it vague in the United States?
I think that, as I said before, with each generation, it gets a little more focused. And I think that historically, the Constitution didn't include us. The man, Thomas Jefferson, one of the framers of Declaration of Independence and Constitution, at the time that that was being framed, he owned 300 slaves. So certainly, initially, we were not included in the Constitution or in legislation, but through a civil war, through marches, through murder, through genocide, through all of the things that have happened historically to get us to this point. We did get legislation in 1964 and 1965 that attempted to make African American and brown and Black people whole, so to speak. So legislation was there, but I think you alluded to this earlier. You can't not necessarily legislate a person's attitude. So it takes many generations, I think, sometimes for people to unlearn prejudice and racism. So I'm thinking about the episode the other day in Missouri, where you had the Black Lives protesters marching in front of a shop that sells Confederate paraphernalia. And a white woman confronted them, and she started to scream that she was going to teach her children and grandchildren, teach her grandchildren hatred, as she was draped in the Confederate flag. So she made an important statement there that she was going to teach them, because babies and children are just not born with that kind of hatred and prejudice and racism. It's taught to them. So it takes, I think it can be unlearned and retaught, but sometimes it takes an entire generation for that to happen.
Now, so this is, I know you are a professor that you educate young children, kids in an elementary level. Would you say social science and cultural studies in curriculum-wise in high school or middle school or even in elementary schools are equipped to deal with such complicated issue?
I don't think currently that many, especially white teachers and white teacher candidates, feel that they are equipped to have a nuanced, complicated conversation about structural racism. I think that folks are on different points of this continuum of moving from a benign, colorblind, multicultural curriculum to a very focused anti-racism curriculum. So many folks at different points. And first of all, have to recognize that as a white person, you're part of a racial category too. Because right now it's white and then everyone and everything else. And our curriculum and schools are built upon this premise. And as I said before, since I'm a critical race theorist, and critical race theory says that all of our structures are built and premised on racism. So our schools are, of course, within that particular framework. So at the moment, I think we have more of a colorblind, I don't see color, I don't see race perspective when it comes to our curriculum. And I would say both in primary, secondary, and post-secondary education.
And now, would this problem also travel with the students at the college level?
I think
the gap, the same issue still hidden, and the curriculum are not equipped to address racism.
I think so. I think that many universities have courses that address racism and look at racism, but not all students are required to take those courses. So I think students that sign up for those courses are the ones who are already on this trajectory towards looking at race at a deeper level and considering how they become anti-racist educators if they're indeed majoring in education. But if you're in other majors, how do you take the concept of anti-racism to whatever organization or corporation that you'll be working for?
Yeah. So how to help people unmask this challenge, the challenge of racism and the issue of racism, like whether within the educational system or policing system or institutional system, or as you refer to, social system. What's your opinion on this? How people can challenge it and unmask that, and I know it is very difficult, it's very sensitive, but any idea of, as educator, that people come up with a solution to that in terms of unmasking things?
I think that sometimes when people think and hear the term cultural competency, that all of a sudden they are expected. For example, a white man is expected all of a sudden to be culturally competent in 400 years of history in terms of what African American folks have gone through. And for me, that's not what we're saying to folks. We're saying to folks, come to it with the perspective of cultural humility. So no one is expecting you to know all of this. Come at it from that perspective, cultural humility. I'm here to walk hand in hand with you as an ally as we start to unpack some of these issues around structural racism, who has power and privilege, and who has been systemically oppressed. And the next thing is you're going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the conversation is uncomfortable for all of us. So it's not going to be a situation where you're going to come in and get a multicultural or anti-racism one-shot training, and then all of a sudden you're ready to go out and start this hard work. It's an ongoing, continuous process in partnership with others who may be a little further along on the continuum than you are, but being willing to take that first step and open yourself up to this discomfort, and, as I say, march hand in hand as an ally.
So things are probably coming into 3 points. And from my perspective, and I would like to ask you please to elaborate. One is acknowledgement. Seems from the media, reading other sources, social media, this issue of racism has been acknowledged. I don't know if this is a good thing, perhaps. The second thing is also there is a slow movement to call for what we call it resources sharing, because this has been really put aside for a long time now. And the third point is community building, as you, I think, refer to it, and not directly community building, but you reach out to the community and then gradually, have this conversation. What do you think of this, like acknowledgement, sharing resources, and also community building?
I think the acknowledgement piece is very important. And I think it has to apply to our white brothers and sisters who continue to try to be neutral in all of this. So it's going to require them as well to acknowledge that racism exists, because from their neutral standpoint, there is they don't consider themselves racist because they're not going to put on a Ku Klux Klan costume and go out and burn crosses. And quite frankly, they're not there, but they are part of the neutral crew that look at race through this colorblind, we're all the same lens. And more often than not, they are in homogenous communities. So you're in a white community where you don't discuss race in your house. It's not discussed in your larger community. It's not discussed in any of schools, your religious organizations. It's just not discussed, therefore it doesn't really exist. So I think what's happening now around the world is you can no longer claim neutrality. If you turn on the TV, if you go to any of your news sources, you're going to see this. So I think seeing it helps people move from more of a neutral stance to one of recognizing systemic racism and oppression. As far as sharing resources, that's where I think equity comes in. So we've been talking about equality for hundreds of years now. So now the conversation is turning more towards equality related to equity. So how good are we as a society at giving certain people what they need when they need it? So for example, if you have an apple pie and you have 8 people out there, maybe not all 8 of them need to get a slice of the pie at that moment. So we give more pie to people who need it. So this whole concept of equity, getting people what they need when they need it. And then your third point about community building is critically important. And I think we are starting to see that in this latest movement with more and more people, especially white people, coming out and saying this is just no longer acceptable and we're just not going to any longer tolerate the status quo. Now the trick will be to make sure we keep this momentum going so that we can affect some positive policy and long-term change.
Now, you are associate, faculty associate with the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice. What do you anticipate to happen in terms of penetrating the curriculum and probably bringing the curriculum into or balancing to study racial issues and racism and address all the very critical points that you covered in this short time?
Well, we just finished up a summer faculty institute where over 30 faculty from different disciplines participated. So I think this is kind of the start of how we get this kind of word out. So now we have 30 faculty members from many different departments, such as criminal justice, education, history, anthropology, biology, some of the other sciences, math. So this is how it happens. You get a group of folks together. We brainstorm on how we are going to take this to our various departments and how we're going to ensure that it filters down to coursework. So it's taking this interdisciplinary approach to examining racism and racial issues. So over the upcoming academic year, I know VSU will be focused on race and racial equity. So I think that this has to permeate into all of our divisions and all of our departments, trickling all the way down to curriculum and what's happening in classrooms.
Is it possible to kind of interconnect between the concept and the real movement of Black Lives Matter and the call for the police defunding? the second one, what does it mean exactly when we say defunding, and how this relate to this great movement, Black Lives Matter?
I think that the defund the police cry is more a cry of reform the police. I think it's a cry to have a national policy on what it looks like to kind of help manage police. I know that the House of Representatives passed their version of a bill relative to police reform. And in that bill, they included no knock. You cannot, in their version, you would be no longer able to just burst a person's door down without knocking. They want to ban chokeholds, and they want to create like this national registry for police misconduct. So they're running into some trouble because the Senate does not want to adapt all of those particular criteria. So I think it's just a call for something to happen on a substantive level related to how police conduct themselves in Black and brown communities. And quite frankly, this has been happening in regards to police. I mean, since there have been a police force in this country, we, as Black and brown people, have had to deal with this. My 92-year-old father and 88-year-old mother tell me frequently about police encounters in Houston that happened with friends and family members in the 1940s and 50s. But back then you didn't have your phone and your camera. So I think that's one of the big differences too now, is that everyone is a recorder of history. And at any given moment, then everyone around the world can see what has happened in the case of George Floyd, for example. So to me, I think that's what defund the police is really getting at. Reform the police. It's not just a few bad actors. There's a systemic thread running through all of the police departments throughout our country, and we need to take a serious look at how that's impacting communities of color.
Thank you, Professor, for your insight and for your contribution to InFocus. And hopefully we will have you again in different circumstances. Thank you so very much, and have a good day.
Absolutely, and you have a good day as well.
And thank you for watching InFocus.